Okay. Were there anything from Second John that came to mind after we hung up last week? Hey, well, let's just look at Third John then. We'll read it and then we'll talk about it a little bit. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health, as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to you to your truth, as indeed you were walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God, for they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers and also stop those who want to, and puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. What do we know again about Third John?
Not much.
Just more from, just very similar to what we've already read, I think, but in a little different words.
It's on a more personal level to just one person.
Yeah. The Second John, there are no names mentioned in Second John, and there's three names mentioned and four people mentioned in Third John. So yeah, it is much more personal. I found myself thinking this last week as I was reading that more than likely Third John is the last of the New Testament letters and books to be written. John's an older guy now, and if historical records are true, he is the last living apostle. So tried to think about what would be running through his head. He's seen all the other apostles martyred or killed. He's seen other people like Stephen and throngs of others persecuted by Paul. And now he's finishing his race well by this letter of accommodation and love to Gaius and the church. We don't know very much about Gaius at all. There's other Gaiuses mentioned in Scripture, but more than likely they're not this same guy. It was a common name, so probably not the same person. So we don't know much about him other than what John writes about him in this short letter. So what things jump out at you as you read this? And I mean, Tom's right, sort of the same as what we've read before. But what can we take out of this book?
We do think it's written before Revelation, correct? Do we don't know. I read some things that speculate that he may have been in Patmos, or he may even have been in Ephesus at the time. But probably it would be before the Revelation. Is that correct?
Well, I have read about 50-50 on that, on the timing of it. Some putting it after the Revelation, and it's written. It's definitely the latter of the three John epistles. But I've read both from sources that I trust that place it before and after the penning of Revelation. And it referred, there was a time where he was, I forget where I read that, Jim. They believe he was just getting released from prison when he wrote this final letter. I can't remember where I read that though. But yeah, what I read, it was up in the air, or not up in the air, but some people thought before, some people thought after, because there were several attributed this to being the final letter or book written of Scripture, the latest date. So this is current events as far as Bible literature goes.
I know this commentary says that the 1st, 2nd, 3rd John were written from Ephesus, maybe 85 to 95 AD, but then he also says that Revelation was probably written while he was in exile on Patmos in the area of 95 to 96 AD. So just one commentary here.
Right. Yeah.
The thing that impresses me about John is he was apparently very young when he became a disciple, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're talking 95 AD, which is 60 some years after Christ was crucified.
Right.
And he was a disciple when Christ was, ministering on earth.
Right.
So it's evident that he was very young when he became a disciple, and he lived to be very old.
The only of those apostles who wasn't martyred for his faith. Not that they didn't try. I mean,
maybe that's why he lived to be so old,
He's one of the people in the Bible that would be interesting to know or know more about. Just his kind of history and being known as the son of thunder. He's the one that he asked Jesus to rain fire and brimstone down on the Samaritans, but yet he seems so sensitive and in the way he writes and the illustrations he uses and the expressions he uses. He's a son of thunder on one hand, and seems like a very sensitive person on the other hand. And in a lot of ways, he's the brother of James, and a lot of his writing, like verse 11, is seems like it would be out of James. That you are what you do. You're known by what you do. If you're of God, you act like it. So he's just always been an interesting person to me.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about anyway, the big transformation that happened in Peter's life, from what we see in the Gospels to his reactionary type of approach to things and how he matured. But I think the same could be said about, a lot of the same could be said about John as well. Somebody who was arguing about where he could sit in the kingdom of heaven, to somebody who has the longest tenure as a disciple maker in the early church.
Also, it seems pretty neat to me that he was really the only one who fulfilled the cross with his mother Mary. When Jesus was crucified, I think he was often referred to as the beloved disciple. Jesus, certainly one of the closest three to him during his ministry.
So one of the things that we all ascribe to, or at least I hope we ascribe to, is a good reputation. And we have four men represented in these 15 verses. And I think it's a good place, a good letter for us to talk about that theme of reputation, because
What was that? I didn't hear what you said.
reputation. I think Third John is a good book to talk about the importance of reputation, because we don't know very much about any of these guys outside of John. We know the most about him, but we know what do we know of Gaius based on what John says about him.
I think there was, like, from what I could understand, there's four Gaius in the Bible. Only this one is that I understand, that was a true follower of Christ, and just a great follower of Christ, and talking to other people about Christ.
In those first 8 verses, what specifically can we say about the kind of man that he was?
To the beloved Gaius,
He
He
certainly
walks in the truth.
Right?
He took
Walks
care to make sure that the missionaries that came through were well cared for, the ones
Yeah.
that were speaking the truth, and sending them on their way, with all the provisions they needed. So this was pretty important to John.
I agree that the statement that he's walking in the truth is, to me, that means someone who, not only talks the talk, but he walks the walk, so to speak. But I mean, in his whole life, he's showing who he is and whose he is.
And so we have 8 verses here that that summarize the type of, at least for us, the type of person that Gaius was. And verses 1 and 2, I think it's pretty clear that he's known as somebody who lives spiritually. And then, as you guys have said, 3 and 4 gets to the point that he's walking truthfully. And great point that Jim brings up that has been true through John's writing in these epistles, is that to walk means that you both speak and act in a way that complement each other and support each other in truth and love. In verses 5 and 6, we see that he's faithful in serving, especially his brothers. And in 7 and 8, that he is ministering generously. And that's the reputation that we have of this brother Gaius, and Paul or John is holding him up and is encouraging him. I wondered if Gaius was not one of the elders or pastors of the church that he's writing to, since a specific letter was written to him. Maybe it was to encourage him as he shared the sermon, First John, with the church that he was charged with leading. But we don't know that. All we know is the kind of guy he was, the type of person that he was. So you go from the spiritual, the truthful, the faithful, the generous Gaius to the next example, Diotrephes. And what do we know about Diotrephes in just 2 verses?
Just the opposite. Simply.
Yeah.
If Gaius is, do you think, is an elder or even a pastor or preacher, what do you think Diotrephes? My Bible just asks the question: is he a pastor? Is he an elder? But he apparently holds some authority or some office to be able to turn people away and do as he's doing.
Yeah, and the fact that he has that he's able to refuse brothers and stop others, you're right, Tom, shows that he has some type of a power, whether that was power that was or authority that was given to him by the church and then he abused it, or whether he has assumed it on his own power and control. So yeah, I mean, yeah, he is diametrically opposed to the person that the Gaius was. You see that he's driven by a prideful ambition. He wants to put himself first. He's very. You can see that he's arrogant. He doesn't acknowledge the authority. He's in verse 10. Refuses to welcome the brothers and stops those who want to join. And he may very well be the reason that the letter's written, that these letters are written, is the damage that he's doing to the church.
It's interesting that these churches must have a pretty active outreach, because they keep referring to people, people that are reaching out and reaching to others.
Yeah.
In the, sometimes that goes wrong, like it did last week, where he tells you about not welcoming people who have, false beliefs or preaching heresy. But it does mean that there are people that are going out and reaching out to others.
Yeah.
Seems like they have a pretty good network among the churches here. John speaks of brothers stopping by and filling him in on what is going on in a lot of these congregations. And apparently they're very trustworthy people.
Right.
And so, they have a pretty good network for not being able to have computers or cell phones. Or even vehicles,
Yeah. Well, he jumps from Gaius, good example, to Diotrephes, don't follow his example, back to a good example in Demetrius. In just a couple verses there, what do we learn of this gentleman?
He just has a good reputation, well spoken of.
Yeah, his testimony is good.
So is this where you got the idea to name your dog, Tony?
No, he was named before we got him.
Really?
Yeah.
His dog's name is Dimitri.
Dimitri doesn't always have a godly example or a very good testimony.
But it was not named Diotrephes, so.
No, not that.
What does the wording of verse 12 mean?
Which part?
He's well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself.
Oh, I think truth. I think he would be referring to Scripture and the things that have been preached and taught. So the gospel, all the Christian teaching would be testifying that Demetrius is a good guy.
Okay.
So and again, we see that sort of threefold testimony of he's received a good testimony from everybody, and then the truth itself affirms him, and then we're going to add our testimony to it again. We've seen that sort of three-pronged approach to giving witness to something. And then in what we see about in the brief introduction, the elder to the beloved Gaius, and what we see in the last 2-3 verses, I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you in person, and we will talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. What else do we learn about John just through those brief words?
It sounds like he has a lot more to say, I mean, to the church, but he's not going to write it down. And I think a lot of it has to do with Diotrephes. You know, he said, if I come, we're going to talk, we're going to approach this matter and take care of it, you know. So that's one of the things, but he certainly has a lot more on his mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think? Does he really realistically think he's going to be able to see these people in face to face?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Tom.
Or does he mean in heaven?
Yeah, I think he's desiring to be in their presence, but I don't know. It'd be interesting to know whether he's really thinks that's a possibility, or because of health and situation that it's not. But it's his desire to be. I think that's what I take away from those last few verses, that he just desires to be in the presence of fellow believers, and he desires peace for fellow believers.
You know, he says the exact same thing at the latter part of 2 John.
Right.
You know, he says, I have much to write to you. I'd rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. That's almost verbatim at the end of 3 John.
Yeah, so I would say he has a real desire to be there and to be with him. So, what would your one takeaway be from 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John? If you had to boil it all down to one thing, what would your takeaway be?
Don't be afraid to stand up for the truth. Live the life that we're supposed to. Follow the commandments, but don't back down if somebody challenges you, because you will be challenged.
He certainly talks a lot about love and truth, and spends a lot of time in exhortations, you know, praising people and you know, commending them on the good job they're doing, and warning them against the Antichrist and others that they need to be aware of constantly.
That's kind of what I got too, that know what's important and what isn't. And he refers to the fact that love one another and love God has always been the number one commandment.
Yeah.
And if you do that and stick to the truth, it shows that God is in you.
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's certainly old advice, but it's amazing, which, you know, most of the Bible is, how well it applies to today, just as well as it did back then. Not a whole lot's changed, unfortunately.
I just I can't get away from the concept that truth and love have to be married together. You can't too far either direction, or to have truth without love, or love without truth, is going to lead you down a dangerous path. So I appreciate just his constant reminder that those two things have to be together, have to be in a believer. Well, where next?
What did you have in mind to take off with another subject to study? I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, we have done a lot of topical stuff, or a lot of textual stuff, just reading through a book of scripture, and one of we just talking about sort of topics of faith. I'm up for that. And I'm also up for continuing in John, going back and reading his gospel, and then maybe in preparation for a study of Revelation. But so I forget what brought that up last week about doing a topical study, Gary, rather than textual. But I'm up for whatever you guys are up for.
I'm that way too. There's more in the Old Testament too we could look at. I've always kind of liked to, or would have liked to do something like Daniel. But I'd say in any John is certainly good.
What about Jude? Since we're there, it's short. And I think I don't know. Kind of more of the same, I think, and it was written well before John, correct?
That's what I have it written in the 60s and 70s, so a couple decades ahead or before John.
I wonder why the placement in the Bible is the way it is.
I've wondered that quite a bit as I've read even Old Testament, why things are when you get into the prophets, then they're overlapping back not the things that have happened that you read before. So
anyway, it really doesn't matter to me. Whatever you guys think.
rock, paper, scissors.
Well, there are a couple other questions. Are we planning to go through the summer? We normally haven't, but
through the summer, is that what you said?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, we have taken a break in some summer months in the past. Another thing that we did talk about last week that may play into that a little bit, Jim, is we talked about when we would be back at the building. We're going to try for the month of June just to focus on weekend services, making sure that we can do those safely, and try to ask people to stay away from the building as much as possible. We do have 2 funeral services there on the 13th and 20th, so I think this is the best way to meet for a while, and maybe like if we were going to take a month off, I personally, selfishly, would take July off. There'll be a couple weeks that I'm away, so maybe we go through June, and then take a break for a month, if that's all right with you guys. Yeah.
That sounds good, and that might mean it would be good to look at a shorter book, and rather than get started on something like John, which is going to take longer than 3 weeks, I'm sure.
So what if we did this? What if we let's do Jude, and let's spend a week on Jude, and then let's go back and let's grab a short Old Testament book. There's nothing as short as 3rd John and Jude in the Old Testament, but we can find something. So let's do Jude for next week, and then we'll go back and maybe do one of those minor prophets that will give us a couple weeks, and just spend some time in the Old Testament. and then for the month of July, we'll take a break, and then maybe in August, when we start back up, then we get into something a little bit meatier, and not meatier, but longer in length.
Well,
Sounds good.
hopefully by then we can meet in person as well.
Yes. Judge Sampson, do you agree with that?
Your Honor.
Whatever you say, boss.
Well, let's go with that, and I'll send out a message to some of the other guys who are usually here and let them know what our plans are. But next week we will cover, if we can handle it. This is a big chunk, 25 verses in the whole book of Jude. So, all right. Any prayer requests this morning?